Hello and welcome to Cool Coffee with Kansas Principals. By and for school administrators, this podcast is intended to promote candid discussion and insight about our great profession. My name is Rick Sola, and as Communications Director for the Kansas Principals Association, I am the host, but I am certainly not the feature. Sit back, take a sip, and enjoy. This is Cool Coffee with Kansas Principals. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to another edition of Cool Coffee with Kansas Principals. Today, I am here with Mr. Rick Rivera, principal of Augusta High School, USD 402, home of the Orioles. Good morning, Rick. How are you?
I'm good. Good, Rick. Good to be here with you this morning.
Yeah, great having you, and appreciate you making time for this. And I don't know if this is getting up any earlier than normal, but it is certainly early at 6:45 as we record this. Is this your normal start time, or did you have to make some additional time for this?
Fridays typically tend to be a little slower, but it's all right. It's good to be up.
Well, I really appreciate it. And before we hit record here, just some things I'd noticed on your social media over the last couple weeks. I want to get into is some of your state visits and also visits over in Washington. But you are here. Is this the first week back from spring break for you?
Yeah, so we just finishing up our first week back from spring break. So we prior to spring break had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. with NASSP and kind of visit with our congressional leaders about education policy.
That's great. Yeah. And, as we get started in this, and it was really neat to go through, I was just kind of reviewing your activity and all the different elected representatives or their offices that you were making connections with. And, I guess, jumping right in, as you went there with a team of people. I guess let's share that out, because I off memory, I can remember a few, but who was your team that went with you over to Washington?
Yeah, so we all represented different portions of the Kansas Principals Association. So Kara Leedy, our executive director, was there. I'm the NASSP state coordinator, so I represent principals on the secondary side. Eric Sago is the principal at Clifton Clyde, and he represents NAESP, so he represents principals on the elementary side. Also joining us was John Cannon, who is our KPA president, and John Beffert, who is our Region 8 representative on the NAESP board. So there's a good number of us that were there this time around.
Yeah, really great. And you mentioned Eric. He's a friend of the show. He's been on here before. And, as you go, this was not your first time doing this, correct?
No, it's actually my third visit to D.C., so it was and I left out Todd Dane. Todd Dane is on the NASSP board as well, so he was able to join us this time around. So, no, this is my third trip to D.C., and getting to visit with lawmakers and again, get to discuss education policy. We also get to give them a picture of what's happening in our classrooms and how their decisions, sometimes it's a legislative aid, but they're the aid that's providing input and research information to our representatives, and so advising them on policy. So it's also good to have connections with them and give them a picture of what's actually happening in our Kansas classrooms.
So as you go over, I guess first, is there a certain level of nerves as you go over? Like, oh gosh, you're kind of mixing with, the decision makers, but they're pretty prominent figures in society. Is there any of that you got to kind of deal with?
I think the first time you go through it, there's a little bit of nerves, and then you understand kind of the process as we go through that. Those nerves kind of go away, and you know that they're just normal people, and really our congressmen, our senators, they're elected to represent us, and so they're our voice in D.C. On the national level, and so
Yeah.
The second time, third time around, not so much the nerves. You just go more prepared. You know what to expect. You know that they are there to listen. That they do actually care about their stakeholders and their constituents. And so it's important that we give them good information and good data to make informed decisions about education policy. So I keep leaving people out. Crystal Crothers, who is down south, was also with us representing. She's the president-elect. So
Okay. I love that you mentioned the representing us, and that's a really great way to look at it. Is I try to imagine going there and you're meeting with different policymakers and so forth, and you kind of feel that. But you're exactly right. That's what they're there to represent. Us. And so, as you go over, or as you prepare for the trip, you mentioned preparing differently, or maybe what to prepare for. What is a message that if you could ensure that one message was conveyed and heard and felt, what is that you're really trying to do when you're over there?
Really, the education impacts all of the success of our state. And so whether it's aviation, manufacturing, agriculture, growth in industry, growth of our economy, it all depends on education. And so the students that are in our classrooms right now, the things that we do matter. And even though, typically in a high school, only our seniors are going to be the ones that vote and our teachers, but the reality is that if we don't educate our young people, it will impact our industry. It'll impact our economy. It'll impact every aspect of our state. And so I think that's an important piece for them to hear. And obviously, when we go there, we're going there representing not particularly our own political views, but representing the interests of education in Kansas. And so part of our NASSP is to really advocate for funding. And this year we talked about maintaining our levels of funding, and so that's important. That we are not always necessarily interjecting our own personal political agendas, but representing education in the state of Kansas as a whole.
Yeah, that's an important point, because we see it's posted. There's a lot of personal opinions and agendas or whatnot out there, but when you're going there, kind of for the good of the whole, that's a good reminder, I suppose. And talk us through, or take us through, like, what do these interactions look like? I saw one picture posted, and it was literally a conversation in an airport, and then there were some that were obviously in the Capitol building and maybe some different locations. But what do these interactions look like?
So they're really pretty personable interactions. So Crystal, Kara, and I happened to be on the same flight going from Wichita to D.C. That happened to be Ron Estes was on that same flight with us, and so we happened to, in the process of walking towards our luggage, walking side by side, and so we just struck up a conversation with him, and it was good. And really we start with low-hanging fruit. So one of our students at Augusta High School received an appointment to the Naval Academy, and Representative Estes was one of his endorsements for that. And so I started out with just thanking him for that. And then as we kind of just talked about kind of just finding common ground, we're going to have some conversations, and also respecting the congressman, because he's flying. He's on a trip, and that's not work related, but certainly he's willing to have conversations with his constituents and being respectful. And I think when we're in the offices of our representatives too, we're going to have a professional dialogue with them, providing facts on how education funding, whether it's Title I funding or funding that helps professional development, school security, mental health of our students, how those things really impact our students, and then how funding for special education and how that impacts all aspects, because we are mandated to provide those services, and if we don't have those funds for special education, then those funds come out of our general budgets, because again, that's mandated services that we have to provide. And so for a lot of our advisors, or the advisors that are there, or our congressmen, sometimes they don't understand how those funding things really impact the day-to-day operations of a school or a school district.
Were there any information shared from you or the team that did kind of bring a reaction, like, oh, that's interesting, or that you noticed that you kind of felt?
Yeah, I feel like, I would say last year, when we talked about how the impact of IDEA funding, when that's cut, those services still need to be provided. And, when we have to pull money from from our general funds to pay for special education services, for those mandated services, that means that impacts our ability to raise salaries for our teachers and for our paraprofessionals and secretaries. And so I felt like last year when we provided some of that information, some of our representatives that did kind of raise an eyebrow, because they didn't kind of quite understand that some of the things that we do are mandated by law. So whether we're getting those federal dollars or not, we still have to provide those services and doing what's best for students. And so every time we're advocating for policy, at the end of the day, it's trying to do the things that are best for students.
Right. No, that's great. I guess we're talking a little bit about the Washington side of it, but I thought, and I think this, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe last semester, the fall semester, but more locally, you had some state reps come to your building and spend a day or some time with you.
Yeah. So we often feel like it is not advantageous for us to have an adversarial relationship with our local representatives. And so Christy Williams is our local rep here in Augusta, and sometimes she is a lightning rod for some of her education policy. And I always say this, that I know Christy personally, and we may not agree on education policy, but I want to make sure that we don't vilify her, because she is a good person who's done some really good things for our community. And so anytime that she wants to be in the building, we welcome her. She does some good things again for our community, and we've had her children come through our school, and she's raised some pretty amazing kids. And so I think that's important, that even though we may disagree on certain policies, that they're human, and when you know them personally, you can have good conversations with them without being adversarial or vilifying the other person. So, and in fact, her and her husband are good friends of ours, and I don't mind saying that, because again, even though we don't always agree on education policy, she's a good person.
Yeah, Rick, I mean, I gotta say, I love that you just said all that. I just think that's so important, and not getting on a soapbox or anything, but I think that's what makes things hard, is the polarization and the lack of willingness to have conversations. Just like you said, we're all human, and we're all people, and we're all trying to do the best that we can. But to be able to have dialogue and to be able to say, we don't necessarily disagree or agree on everything. We may not, we need to be able to have that common dialogue. And so just to hear you articulate that in such a way, gosh, I just wish that could be kind of the way we could all come together on all of this. I think you mentioned in one of your posts, education transcending the political line or politics or however,
Yeah, so education is not a partisan issue.
Yeah,
and that's just the reality. Education is a great equalizer. It allows, if we want to break the cycle of poverty, education can do that. If we want to have a better society, people that can communicate with each other and have these collaborative dialogues, education does that. And so I think it's a great equalizer, but it's not a partisan issue. We want kids who can do math, and we want kids who can read and understand the world around them, and education in our classrooms can do that. That we can facilitate those conversations.
We hear a lot about, just like you and your team, and both locally and abroad, advocating for public education, advocating for what's best for kids. What would be your advice to someone who might be listening that's like, I'm in a building, I'm working hard, I'm really doing my job. What is that going to look like for me, going about the grind of the day?
Yeah, I think it's sometimes we get so involved in the daily grind that we forget to tell our story outside of our walls. And so a lot of people view education from their own experience. And so they were in public schools for 12, 13 years, and then they went to college, and so that must be what's happening in our schools. And a lot has changed from the time I graduated high school to today. In fact, a lot has changed over the last 5 years in our society and how schools function. And I think it's important that we share our story. So it's, it could be a simple social media post of the good things that are happening in our classrooms, of an activity that teachers are doing. And oftentimes we will get a comment on our social media page of, I wish they did that when I was in school, or, wish we had that when I was in school. And unless, we keep our doors secured for a reason in public schools and in our education settings. But sometimes because of that, teachers or parents and our stakeholders outside of our building don't get to see all the good things that are happening. And so I think it's important that we share our story. And then again, with our local and our state and national representatives, of anytime we can get them in our building, just a simple walking tour. This is what's happening in our buildings. These are the good teachers and good things that are taking place, and also acknowledging that we're not perfect, and there's things that we need to improve on as well. So if we're in DC or we're in Topeka and we're advocating for education funding, then we also need to be accountable for how we spend those dollars.
Yeah. What would you anticipate was a big takeaway from the visit in your building from our state rep?
I think really the thing, while we disagree on some education policy, that she really gets excited when she sees kids learning and the different programs that we have that are impacting our students. So we've got an excellent JAG-K program, and she'll come in and visit with those students. And anytime, and here's the thing, anytime one of our students or one of our student groups are going to go to Topeka, Christy's always welcoming those kids and wants to know what's happening. She's an alumni of Augusta High School. She's a proud Oriole, and so anytime she gets to give an Oriole a tour of the Capitol, if it fits within her schedule, she's always willing to do that.
That's great. Well, thanks for the insight on all of that, and just really interesting and fascinating. We always hear and see a lot of the news come across, but to be, literally like feet on the ground, talking with different representatives is great. You just mentioned Augusta High School, and I wanted to hear kind of in a 30-second kind of describe Augusta High School for those who aren't familiar, location and how big and so forth.
Yeah, so we're a medium-sized 4A school, one high school town, one high school, one middle school, 3 elementaries, about 20 miles east of Wichita. And whenever anybody asks me about Augusta High School, I always say it's a good place to be. And I think in education, sometimes when we talk about funding and we talk about really when it comes to our teachers, it's teacher salaries. And I always say we ought to pay teachers enough to take money off the table, and I feel like our district has done a good job of that. And then it's your culture that makes the big difference. It's like, is this a place that people want to come and work and be a part of it? And I think that's the biggest part is our culture, and we care for each other and we care for kids, and we want to do what's best for our kids. And I think that can be spoken not only of Augusta High School, but our district our middle school and our elementary schools, that we strive to have a good culture where people are cared for.
So, Rick, you've been principal at Augusta High School how many years?
So this is my 10th year in the district. My 5th year here as the principal at the high school. So I was at the middle school for 5, as an assistant principal, and then this is my 5th year here at the high school.
And now you're sitting here in the springtime, and some different plans for next year.
So we'll be making a little bit of transition. Next year I will be moving to, or this summer I'll be moving to Abilene to become their assistant superintendent for teaching and learning. And again, it was not necessarily on my radar, but something that an opportunity that came knocking on our door. And my wife and I feel strongly that if God calls you to go somewhere, you need to be obedient. And so again, not something that we were looking for initially, but once it was there, we just felt the peace about, this is where God is moving us, and so felt like being obedient and moving there. And it'll be a completely new challenge for us, but really feel like it'll be a good move for my wife and I and my son and our family, my daughter. That it'll be, we're looking forward to being part of the Abilene family, and so that'll be some changes that are coming down our way here in the future.
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations. Sounds very exciting, and all the best to you on that. I'm thinking about the number of principals in the state that are either A, they're retiring, or B, they're making a transition from the building they're in, doing exactly what you're doing, or maybe moving levels or whatever. As you're sitting here, and we record this, it's March 28th, but as you're sitting here and thinking ahead to the next 8 weeks or so, is there anything on your mind as you know that you're kind of wrapping things up and you want to leave it in the best possible condition, for lack of a better way to put it, for your predecessor here? Anything on your mind with that?
Yeah, I think I had a boss early on. I worked for an organization called Young Life, and Bill Maston was his name, and he always left me with, a lot of times we don't leave well. I think we in jobs, and so I think that's been my challenge is to leave well, to leave as we kind of transition on. So I also kind of with that is, how can I set up the next person for success? And so how can I make sure that the good things that we have been doing here can continue? And part of that is because it's I am doing those things, or I'm leading those things, and so being okay with when the next person comes in, they're going to do things that are different, and they're going to do things that fit who they are, but then kind of in that process of leaving well, this has been a good place for me, and it's been a good place for my family, and so that we finish strong, get through graduation. Obviously for high school administrators, that's kind of our second semester is filled with making sure that our open positions are filled, and that that graduation happens, that we get kids walking across that stage, and making sure that we kind of set those things up for them to be successful in their future. So kind of those right now are my things, are focused on getting kids graduated, focused on filling some positions, which again goes back to some of our earlier stuff was, we have positions that are posted that we don't have the same number of applicants that we had 4 or 5 years ago, and sadly, education and becoming a teacher is not as lucrative as it used to be, or sought after. Kids aren't wanting to do that, and so we have to address that. We have to address that based on outside voices that are maybe doing that, but then our inside voices of why aren't people wanting to come into our industry.
Yeah, the why not? I think it goes back to this, telling your story. Because we do see a lot of not education, or I wouldn't do that now, or and I hate to say it, but sometimes it's the negative story that may come out of within our profession. And that I wouldn't. If I did it again, I wouldn't go. I've heard that before. I wouldn't go into education, and that's not the message we want to get out there. There's so many good things happening in the schools, in the districts, that to celebrate. And so, certainly. Well, and all the best with that. You're right. The pool of candidates is not what it once was, and I've seen that change. And you mentioned over the last 5 years, and there's certainly been a shift, and just in all sorts of different areas of the profession, as I'm sure in other professions too, but definitely have seen that in education. You mentioned the leave well. What great advice to hear it. And I've heard before, a principal once said, the last 60 days is what will get remembered. And I've had one transition similar to what you're doing, where I went from one building to another, but it was basically April and May of 2020. So it was kind of the least of everybody's mind. So, but yeah, certainly you want to leave things, better than you found it type thing. And you mentioned some advice, but I was going to ask you both the best advice you've ever received, maybe as an early administrator, something that stuck with you through the years, and then the advice you would give to a brand new administrator.
Someone once said, your building's going to be okay without you. Get out of it. So, when it comes to going to professional development, things like that, it's okay for you to be out of your building for a day, and doing that. And so, that was part of the reason I got involved with KPA was I needed to grow my network and get out of my building. And so that when that opportunity came available, and I've been able to meet just some great people around the state because of that. So I think that's the big part is sometimes we get stuck within our own four walls of our schools, and we don't look outside of that. And so I would say, and again, part of that is as administrators, we fear leaving our building for a day, that things are going to collapse, and the reality is they're not. Like, teachers are going to do what they need. Now, you have to leave your, making sure that things are in place for decisions that happen and things to maintain order while you're not in the building. But the building will be okay without you that day. Yeah,
no, that's good advice. And you mentioned the KPA, and I've shared many times on this podcast before the impact it's had on me, but certainly the network within the KPA it's vast and it's strong, and it's really incredible. That's what I've enjoyed the most, is seeing what's going on across the state and being in touch with people from across the state. And I love that you bring that up. You've already done this a little bit, but as we conclude here, a quick brag and shout out to your people in Augusta High School.
Yeah, so we got some amazing teachers, and that's because we have some amazing students. And so, that's the why we do it, right? It's because why we're in the classroom is because of kids, and why we're in admin is because of all of our kids. And so that would be my brag is we have great kids. We've got great adults in our building that love on our kids and help them learn and grow and take care of what needs to take care for them to be successful in the classroom. And somebody once said this too, that the greatest lessons that we will teach our students will have little to do with curriculum. And I think that's important.
Yeah. Well, it sounds great, and thanks again for your time, but thanks for all that you do within the state and with KPA, and for representing all of us as you both in your hometown, but abroad out in Washington, and just appreciate all that. And again, appreciate your time being here, Rick, and wish you a good weekend and a great final quarter here of the school year, and all the best to you in your transition to Abilene.
Thanks, Rick. Have a good day.
Check the notes section for more information on this episode and to learn more about the KPA and its mission to develop and support all principals through optimized learning, collaborative leadership, networking, and service. Be sure to check back in for our next episode and spread the word about cool coffee with Kansas principals. Catch you next time.